The Camp Liberty killings shocked the military community and highlighted the urgent need for better mental health support for soldiers. Russell's case became a grim example of what can happen when psychological wounds of war go untreated. Today, he remains in military prison, a tragic reminder that the battlefield isn't always the only place soldiers face danger. John M. Russell was a veteran soldier with over 15 years of service in the U.S. Army. He was deployed to Iraq on his third tour and assigned to the 54th Engineer Battalion out of Bamberg, Germany. Russell was approaching retirement but struggling with stress and mental health issues. He had reportedly shown signs of depression and paranoia. Fellow soldiers noticed his behavior had changed. In early May 2009, Russell was ordered to undergo counseling at the Combat Stress Clinic at Camp Liberty near Baghdad. Reports suggest he believed he was being humiliated by mental health staff and that they were trying to end his career. On May 11, Russell was escorted to the clinic for another appointment. But that day would end in bloodshed. Russell managed to seize his escort's weapon, stole a vehicle, and returned to the clinic. Inside, he opened fire with an M16 rifle, killing 5 service members, including 2 officers, 2 enlisted soldiers, and a Navy officer. It was the deadliest attack by a U.S. service member against other American troops during the Iraq War. Russell was arrested immediately. The massacre raised serious questions about mental health care for deployed troops under extreme stress. His lawyers argued he was suffering from severe depression and psychosis. After years of legal proceedings, Russell pleaded guilty in 2013 to avoid the death penalty. A military judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The Camp Liberty killings shocked the military community and highlighted the urgent need for better mental health support for soldiers. Russell's case became a grim example of what can happen when psychological wounds of war go untreated. Today, he remains in military prison, a tragic reminder that the battlefield isn't always the only place soldiers face danger. In the dark of night, one American soldier left his base in Afghanistan, and committed one of the deadliest massacres by a single U.S. serviceman since the Vietnam War. Who was Robert Bales, and what drove him to murder 16 innocent civilians in cold blood? Today, we uncover the disturbing truth behind the Kandahar massacre. Robert Bales was born on June 30, 1973, in Norwood, Ohio. He grew up in the Midwest and joined the U.S. Army after the 9/11 attacks. By 2012, Bales was a staff sergeant with 4 combat deployments, 3 in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan. Fellow soldiers described him as a dedicated but sometimes troubled man. He had financial problems back home, and he had narrowly avoided charges for previous misconduct. But no one expected what he would do next. In March 2012, Bales was stationed at Camp Balambay in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, a region plagued by Taliban violence. On the night of March 11, Bales left his base alone, heavily armed and wearing night vision goggles. He entered 2 nearby villages, Al-Khozai and Najiban, and went house to house, shooting civilians as they slept. Many victims were women and children. Witnesses say he gathered some of the bodies and set them on fire. By the time he returned to base, 16 Afghans were dead, and 6 more were injured. The massacre shocked the world and fueled outrage in Afghanistan. The U.S. military quickly detained Bales. He was flown back to the U.S. and charged with 16 counts of premeditated murder, among other charges. Prosecutors called it a cold-blooded, calculated slaughter. Bales' defense argued he suffered from PTSD and traumatic brain injury, and had been drinking alcohol that night. But many felt there was no excuse for such brutality. Facing the death penalty, Bales pleaded guilty in 2013 to avoid execution. In exchange, he received life in prison without the possibility of parole. At his sentencing, Bales apologized, saying there was not a good reason in this world for what he did. The families of the victims, however, felt justice was incomplete. Many argued that the massacre reflected wider failures in the war in Afghanistan, and raised questions about the mental toll of endless combat deployments. Today, Robert Bales serves his life sentence at the U.S. disciplinary barracks in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. His actions are a grim reminder of the human cost of war, on both sides. A secret affair, a bitter breakup, and a murder that shocked the U.S. Army community. In 2015, Army Sergeant Maliek Kearney drove hundreds of miles to kill his wife, leaving behind a trail of betrayal and tragedy. This is the true story of Maliek Kearney and the murder of Carlin Ramirez. Maliek Kearney and Carlin Ramirez were both members of the U.S. Army. Carlin, just 24 years old, was a young soldier stationed at Fort Meade, Maryland. She had recently given birth to the couple's baby girl. But behind closed doors, their marriage was falling apart. Kearney, based at Joint Base Charleston in South Carolina, was having an affair with another woman, Dolores Delgado, a fellow soldier and single mother herself. Carlin wanted to move on and planned to separate from Maliek. She had even taken out a protective order against him, citing threats and abuse. But Kearney didn't want to lose control, or share custody of their newborn baby. Prosecutors later said Kearney and Delgado plotted together to murder Carlin and make it look like a random crime. On August 24, 2015, Maliek Kearney drove nearly 500 miles from South Carolina to Maryland. In the early hours of August 25, he snuck into Carlin's townhouse near Fort Meade while she slept. Inside the home, Kearney shot Carlin at close range, killing her while her baby daughter lay next to her in bed. The child was found alive but alone when police arrived later that day. Detectives quickly found inconsistencies in Kearney's story. Cell phone records and surveillance footage showed his long overnight drive. When confronted with the evidence, Kearney's girlfriend, Dolores Delgado, agreed to testify against him in exchange for a lighter sentence. Delgado admitted she lent Kearney her car and gave him a gun. She even told investigators they discussed the murder for weeks beforehand. In August 2018, Maliek Kearney was found guilty of crossing state lines to commit domestic violence resulting in death. In April 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. His accomplice, Dolores Delgado, was sentenced to 17 years for her role in planning the crime. Today, Maliek Kearney remains behind bars, while Carlin's family continues to fight for justice and to protect her daughter's future. A troubled young officer. A tragic warning ignored. And a deadly rampage on one of America's largest military bases. This is the shocking true story of 2nd Lieutenant William Kreutzer Jr., and the Fort Bragg shooting that left the U.S. Army reeling. William J. Kreutzer Jr. was a 25-year-old Army officer stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, home of the elite 82nd Airborne Division. Kreutzer came from a small town in Maryland and joined the Army to serve his country and build a career. But behind his uniform, Kreutzer struggled. Fellow soldiers described him as quiet and isolated. He had a hard time fitting in and often felt ridiculed by his peers and subordinates. In the weeks before the shooting, Kreutzer showed clear signs of distress. He told a military counselor that he felt bullied and worthless, and even hinted at harming himself or others. Some soldiers even reported he had threatened violence, but higher-ups dismissed the threats as empty talk. Instead of serious intervention, Kreutzer was ordered to turn in his personal weapons, but he still had access to Army-issued firearms. On the morning of October 27, 1995, Kreutzer took a sniper position overlooking a field where about 1,300 soldiers were assembled for a morning run. Using a semi-automatic rifle, he opened fire on his own battalion. Chaos erupted. One soldier, Major Stephen Badger, was killed, and 18 others were wounded before Kreutzer was tackled and arrested by fellow troops. The shooting shocked Fort Bragg and the entire military community. Kreutzer was court-martialed and found guilty of premeditated murder and attempted murder. In 1996, he was sentenced to death, the first U.S. soldier to receive a death sentence since the Vietnam War era. Kreutzer's legal team fought for years to overturn his death sentence. They argued that he suffered from untreated mental illness, including severe depression and paranoia, and that his commanders failed to act on clear warning signs. In 2009, after multiple appeals and a retrial, the Army commuted his death sentence to life in prison without parole. Today, William Kreutzer Jr. remains in military prison. His story is a dark reminder that soldiers face invisible battles, and sometimes, those battles explode into unimaginable tragedy.